I used to live in a small town in Southern Virginia. Nothing much ever happened there. Quiet roads, Sunday potlucks, neighbors who smiled but never said too much. The kind of place where churches outnumber grocery stores. This happened about 4 years ago, when I was 24. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship and moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of town. The house was old, creaky, and backed up to a line of woods. I worked the night shift at a gas station, so I slept during the day and stayed up late. It started with a flyer. One morning after work, I found a piece of paper stuck under my windshield wiper. It looked handmade, like it had been printed on someone's old home computer. It read, "Come experience renewal. True worship. True purpose. First Revival Church of Deliverance. Sunday 11 a.m. There was no address, just a phone number and a weird drawing of praying hands wrapped in chains. I thought it was creepy, but I tossed it in the passenger seat and forgot about it. That night at work, I mentioned it to my coworker, Jacob, and his face changed. "Man, throw that thing away," he said. "That church is bad news." He told me it wasn't an official church. No website, no social media, nothing. It was run by a guy everyone just called Pastor Gray. Apparently, he used to be a preacher at a Baptist church until something happened, and he got removed. The official story was a theological disagreement, but locals whispered about something darker. A girl went missing from his youth group. Nothing was ever proven, but the church split, and he disappeared for a while. Now he was back. I shrugged it off. Creepy, sure, but lots of rumors fly around in small towns. Then a few nights later, I was driving home after my shift. It was around 4 a.m., pitch black, and fog had settled thick across the road. As I turned the corner near the woods that backed up to my house, I saw someone standing on the side of the road. He was wearing a gray suit. No coat, no umbrella, just standing there in the fog, facing the trees. I slowed down as I passed, and for a moment, I thought he looked over his shoulder. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about him made my stomach twist. I didn't stop. Next morning, I found another flyer. This time, it was taped to my front door. "Come see what's been hidden. Come home. 11 a.m. Deliverance is waiting." Now I was freaked out. I hadn't told anyone where I lived, and there were no cameras around. I called the number on the flyer, and to my surprise, someone answered. The voice was calm. Too calm. "Welcome," the man said. "You've been chosen. Are you ready to unburden your soul?" I hung up. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made me flinch. At one point, I swore I heard footsteps on the back porch, but when I checked, no one was there. Just wet footprints. Bare feet. Human. I took a picture and sent it to Jacob. He told me to come stay with him for a few nights. I agreed. But the next evening, before I left, curiosity got the better of me. I drove around, trying to see if I could find this so-called church. I ended up on a narrow dirt road with no signs, just trees pressing in on both sides. About a mile in, I saw it, a small, run-down building with a crooked cross on top. The windows were dark, but one light flickered in the back. There were several cars parked outside, none newer than 1995. The grass was overgrown, and wooden boards covered some of the windows. I didn't go in. I didn't even get out of the car. I turned around and got the hell out of there. Later that night, Jacob and I sat in his apartment, and I told him everything. He didn't say much, just handed me a beer and locked all the doors. But around 2:30 a.m., his dog started barking at the front window. We looked out, and there, standing across the street, was the man in the gray suit. He didn't move, just stared, like he knew I was inside. We called the cops, but of course, by the time they showed up, he was gone. After that, I moved. I found a place 2 towns over, and never looked back. Jacob and I still talk sometimes, and he told me that about a month after I left, that old church burned down in a fire. No one knows how it started. Fire department said it was electrical, but people whispered it was something else. Something spiritual. The remains of the church were dug up. Underneath, they found bones. Dozens of them. Animal bones mostly, but some, they weren't. And as for Pastor Gray, he disappeared again. But sometimes, I swear I still see him. In crowds, in parking lots, at the edge of my dreams, always in that same gray suit, just watching. I grew up in a religious household. Not just church on Sundays kind of religious, but old school Pentecostal, fire and brimstone sermons, speaking in tongues, casting out demons, the whole 9 yards. When I turned 19, I left home and moved in with my cousin Eric in western Pennsylvania. He lived in a quiet, wooded area near a place called Shepherd's Hollow. The name sounded peaceful, but the locals didn't speak of it fondly. Eric told me there was an abandoned church deep in the woods near the edge of Hollow Creek. Said people used to go missing out there. Hikers, campers, just gone. Every time someone disappeared, there'd be talk about the Hollow Shepherd, an urban legend about a pastor who led his congregation into the forest and was never seen again. I laughed it off. A creepy church in the woods and a cult leader ghost? Sounded like some campfire nonsense. That changed the night we went looking for it. It was early October. Leaves were falling, the air had that dry, dying chill, and Eric had a bright idea. Let's go hike up to the old church and take photos. Said it'd make a sick backdrop for Halloween content. I didn't want to be the coward, so I agreed. We packed flashlights, water, and our phones and started hiking just before sundown. The trail was rough, mostly deer paths and broken tree limbs, and it took over an hour to reach the edge of the hollow. That's when everything got quiet. No birds, no bugs, just wind. And then we saw it, the church. It sat crooked on a stone foundation, sunken in on one side like the ground was swallowing it. The windows were shattered, and vines climbed the walls like veins. The wooden sign out front was rotted, but you could still read the faint letters. Holy Ministry of the Shepherd's Flock. Inside was worse. Pews were overturned, the altar was cracked, and what looked like animal bones were scattered on the floor. A moldy Bible sat open on the pulpit, but the pages had been written over, verses crossed out, replaced with strange symbols and frantic handwriting. One phrase repeated several times in bold, scratched ink. He walks again when the flock forgets. We both felt it, a pressure, like the air had thickened. I wanted to leave, but Eric started filming. He walked around the sanctuary, narrating like it was some cool haunted house. I stayed near the door, flashlight aimed at the hallway that led to the back rooms. That's when I heard it. A voice. Not loud, almost like a whisper layered in the wind. It said, "Come back to the fold." I spun around and told Eric we had to go. He thought I was messing with him, but then his flashlight flickered and went out. Mine did too, just snapped to black, like the batteries were dead. That's when we heard movement. Heavy footsteps. Coming from the hallway. Not fast. Not slow. Measured. Deliberate. We ran. Bolted out the front door and didn't stop until we hit the trail. The forest seemed darker than before, unnatural. Like the shadows had changed shape. When we finally got back to the house, we were covered in cuts and mud. Neither of us spoke for a while. Eric checked his phone, but the footage was gone. His camera app had frozen during recording, and the file was corrupted. We told a few people what happened. Most didn't believe us. Some warned us not to talk about the church. Said that place was meant to be forgotten. Over the next few weeks, weird things started happening. Eric woke up one night with dirt in his bed, like someone had dumped a handful of soil on his pillow. He swore he hadn't been outside. Another night, he found a tiny wooden cross on the porch, carved out of bone. No one knew where it came from. And then he started sleepwalking. I caught him once, standing in the backyard, barefoot, staring at the woods, whispering something I couldn't understand. I moved out 2 weeks later. Eric stayed. I haven't heard from him in almost a year. I called, texted, even reached out to his neighbors. Eventually, the police did a welfare check. His house was empty. No signs of struggle. Just a note on the kitchen table. It read, "The shepherd calls. I've heard him. I remember now. They never found him." I used to clean churches for extra money when I was in college. It was quiet work, nobody around, just me, a few buckets, and the scent of lemon cleaner in the air. But there was one job I took in a small town in Pennsylvania that I've never forgotten. The church was old, over 100 years at least. Thick red brick walls, a towering steeple. The kind of place that made your breath hang in the air even in summer. I got the job through a local friend who said the place needed deep cleaning once a week. Floors, pews, windows, and the basement. The pastor was an older man named Brother Callahan. Kind, soft-spoken. He told me they mostly used the sanctuary and the small office upstairs. The basement, he said, was for storage. But every time he mentioned it, he got weirdly stiff. Almost like he didn't want to talk about it. The first few weeks were uneventful. I'd listen to music, mop floors, wipe down hymnals. Easy. But the basement was different. The stairs creaked like something out of a horror movie, and the air smelled old. Damp, but not moldy. More like something that had been buried. The basement was lined with bookshelves, file cabinets, and old wooden pews stacked on their sides. At the far end was a small, locked room with a heavy wooden door. Every time I went down there, I felt watched. Like something was sitting just behind that door listening. One night in early November, I stayed later than usual. I'd had midterms that week and was behind on cleaning. I remember checking the clock. It was 11:42 p.m. and I had just finished sweeping the sanctuary. I made my way down to the basement with a mop and bucket. As I reached the last step, I noticed the light at the far end of the basement was on. That was odd. I never turned that one on, and I was sure I'd been the only one in the building. I figured maybe Brother Callahan had been down earlier and forgot to switch it off. But then I heard it. A voice. Muffled. Low. Almost chanting. I froze, thinking maybe the pastor was doing a private prayer or something, but it didn't sound like English. It was this deep, guttural whisper, rhythmic like a ritual. I edged closer, mop in hand, heart pounding. The sound was coming from the locked room. Except now it wasn't locked. The door was cracked open. I should have left. I know that now. But I was young, stupid, and curious. I stepped closer, just enough to peek inside. There was no one there. Just candles. Dozens of them. Some lit. Others melted to the floor. And symbols, scrawled all over the walls in red. Not paint. I'm sure of that. The smell was coppery and metallic. Something was in the center of the room too. An old altar with a cracked statue of a figure I didn't recognize. Eyes covered. Mouth wide open. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard the chanting again. Louder now, clearer, and not coming from a person. It was echoing, all around me. I sprinted up the stairs, left the mop, the bucket, everything. I quit the next day. Never went back. Didn't even ask for my last check. A few months later, the church burned down. Local news said it was an electrical fire. But they also mentioned that firefighters found something strange in the basement. Symbols. Bones. Some they couldn't identify. And Brother Callahan? He disappeared. Vanished. No forwarding address. No trace. Just gone. I've looked into that church since, local records, old articles. It was built over the site of an orphanage that burned down in 1902. The fire killed 23 children and the matron. No one ever found out what caused it. Some say the basement was always cold because of poor insulation. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And every now and then, usually around November, I still dream about that chanting. And it always ends the same way, with that door creaking open, and something whispering my name.